I went through the very strenuous and very stressful interview process, which you do at Blackstone. You meet everyone, you talk to everyone, it goes on and on and on. And actually the day of my final interview with Chad was the day my wife gave birth prematurely to twins on Ladbroke Grove, literally in the morning. So it wasn't the best precursor for a meeting with Chad, he's a bit of a stickler for detail and especially energy. When John took control of the real estate business, he really sort of had this great saying, when people are jumping out of the pool, we will be jumping in. So it was almost that sort of reverse psychology of around investing. And he still does it hugely successfully today across God knows how many strategies. And what a phenomenal individual. The market really excited me. So I decided to step back and resigned 12 months ago and started, longer than 12 months ago, started Rotation Real Estate on the 1st of Jan.
Today on the People Property Place podcast, I'm excited to host James Locke, founder of Rotation Real Estate. From labourer, manager, innovator, developer, to a 13-year stint at Blackstone as an investor, he has moved to founding partner and owner of Rotation Real Estate, an entrepreneurial, creative and enterprising investment manager driven by passion, ethics and profit to identify and reimagine the real estate of tomorrow. In this episode, we'll explore James's early career moves, transition from corporate leadership to entrepreneurship, his vision for the future, opportunities in the market, and how Rotation is poised to capitalise on the opportunity set in front of us. James, welcome to the podcast.
Good to be here, Matthew. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. Well, a place that we always like to start these conversations is
Sure.
How and why did you get into real estate? Because you got into it at a very young age, as a labourer, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, very true. So background is farming. And based on the back of that, I was a very bad farm labourer. I actually reversed off my father's car when I was 16 in a tractor and trailer. So that was a very quick career move to an alternative sector. On the back of that, both he and I agreed that I shouldn't be involved with farming, and I went to London to go and labour for a friend's business, family business. So I spent my summer holidays just living on the back of Edgware Road and sleeping on the floor of this individual's house, and then during the day basically breaking down bricks and driving minivans to Wandsworth Dump and basically getting at the hard end of real estate. It was a small property company doing high-end refurbs around central London. So a great and very enjoyable way to spend my summer and various holidays.
So have you always been one could assume you're hardworking, coming from a family background, probably up early, ploughing the fields or attending the livestock. Were you always one for physical activity and hard work and long hours, or?
Once again, my father would disagree entirely with that. Up early for sure, but in terms of input to farming, very, very low on the agenda. But definitely interested in physical labour. Definitely have always had this sort of almost a fixation with physical buildings and real estate from a young age. I actually wanted to be an architect, but didn't have the patience or the math skills to actually pursue that. So I then pivoted into an alternative theme around the same sort of stuff, which is fundamental real estate.
So you did the labouring piece, and that was your window into real estate. You then went on to Oxford Brookes, is that right, to go and study it more formally?
Yep. So started off in a company called Jonathan Alexander, and then continued to work for them from 16 through to the end of my studying at Oxford Brookes, or as it's known today, Oxford No Books. And yes, at that stage it pivoted into a slightly more, I guess, grand entity with external backing as shareholders. We had Don McCrickard, who was ex-chief executive of TSB Bank, and also Michael Ashcroft, who I'm sure some of your listeners have heard of as our main two investors. So on the back of coming out of Oxford Poly, I went to the office day one in a pinstripe, thinking I'd probably made it. I'd got some form of qualification, and my colleagues who I'd been labouring with took the suit off me day one, literally, and I was back in at ground zero. But that was the transition to what became actually a very successful residential investment platform. We listed the business, then called London Town PLC, 5 years after I came out of university. And at that stage, probably it was 10 years or 15 years ahead of its current peer group in terms of that PRS platform. So very exciting times. We did a lot of projects. We were running around driving fancy cars, thought we had made it, and then arguably things were too good to be true. And unfortunately, we bought too many sites with consents because we had to fuel this machine of just product to go and sell to individual buyers. And as a result, you pay a slight premium. And when the market turned, we got slightly caught out. But great journey. Yeah, really enjoyed it.
How did your role evolve from kind of labourer doing some of the manual lifting to driving fast cars and probably taking a bit more of a leading role in that business? Did you kind of find your kind of niche there, or?
Well, you have to, don't you? Sink or swim mentality. It was something that, I'm sort of getting used to now as being, as like yourself, an owner of your own business. You have the predator mentality or the prey, and the predator is basically eyes forward, and you basically throw yourself into it. I mean, I was dealing with individuals covering a spectrum of sales, marketing, and development, working on appraisals, putting together brochures, speaking to investors at a very young age. And for sure, it was extremely nerve-wracking and extremely challenging. But when you're a team of 4, and then you become a team of 5, and then a team of 20, and a team of 25, you grow with that, and the opportunity it brings is something that I think gives you the energy to keep going. But there was no structure. It was literally wake up, the 4 of us, 2 directors, or family ownership, and then 1 director, and then I guess myself, we would just sit down for the day and just roll the dice. So something I really enjoyed doing, and something which probably has seen me evolve into where we're sitting today.
I guess a lot of your friends from Brooks went on kind of to the grad schemes at the big surveying shops to kind of get their letters and have a little bit more formal structure and rotation.
Yeah.
That didn't appeal to you?
Never did, no. I mean, I had a job offer, coming out of university, and during the university years I was working for this business, so I felt a connection to it and an element of not ownership but responsibility. Every holiday I'd work for this company, so for those 3 or 4 years. And I did one interview, I think, in advance of during my times at Oxford Brooks, and that was with Healy and Baker, which was great. I spent 2 weeks, I think, in those days, Portman Square or Hanover Square. Great fun socially, but I didn't get the same buzz out of putting a hard hat on and actually going to a site, or even just driving a van to Wandsworth Dump. It was like the hands-on approach was probably better for me, better for my skill sets than the maybe a slightly more institutional approach.
You said that business had a meteoric rise and then had its challenges.
Yeah.
What prompted you to kind of pivot and change, and what role did you move to after that?
Well, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about development risk and capital risk. We bought a site outside the Tate Modern, which was the old Hopton Street print works. We got the first high-rise residential consent, and then we got torn apart by a bit of bureaucracy and a bit of probably bad management on our behalf. And the investor I mentioned, Michael Ashcroft, who was in his rights to do so, pulled the funding on that scheme, which fundamentally folded the actual business. So on the back of that, I wanted to try and continue that path in development. And then the next stage was to probably broaden my skill sets outside of central London and look at what was happening, 20 years ago was urban regeneration and this whole thing of mixed-use development, which when you sit today and you're in a mixed-use building in a mixed-use world and a mixed-use capital city, it seems ridiculous. But then it was actually quite incredible. The idea of putting residential, commercial and industrial in the same master plan, or even the same uses within a building, or different uses within a building, was pretty unheard of. So I came across a company called Roxy Light, which sounds like a nightclub, and it basically was a nightclub. 3 founders, once again, very small, very entrepreneurial. They had some great backing from HSBC during this period, and a joint venture with Lang O'Rourke called UR UK. And we went out, and once again, probably post-lunch, I was the only one in the office. So I went out trying to find opportunities to invest both the JV's money, but also our own capital into projects. We also had a house building company called Saxon Homes, which I was responsible for going to twice a week, and that was based in High Wycombe. But very entrepreneurial. I mean, once again, incredible opportunity. And we came across some, legends of the industry. I mean, I was sitting across the table once with Gerald Ronson, discussing buying a Vauxhall Motors car plant, which for us was just ridiculous. I mean, I was 28 at this stage, and there was Mr. Ronson adjacent. We got involved with buying the Boots site up in Nottingham, which was a major regeneration project, still ongoing today, been phenomenally successful. Unfortunately, we ran out of juice before it came to that success, as always the case. But it was just once again a traditional property company, but with some really interesting individuals and a great entrepreneurial spirit and some great projects.
And so how did your kind of role evolve, or was it just try and find deals, engineer deals, structure deals, oversee the kind of development of these deals, and just run hell for leather at the next thing?
Definitely hell for leather on all things. No, I mean, my skill set was very much origination through building, by now, a pretty decent contact base for a person at my age then. The architectural side I loved, so urban planning, design, development, and then getting involved with the transactional side of it and also the financing side of it. I'll go back to my first comment about being a very enthusiastic labourer, but not necessarily a very good one. At that stage, probably didn't have the skill set to go and deliver and execute on major master plans. But we had some great projects, and getting consents of million square feet, on things like Vauxhall Motors car plant was great, and likewise in Nottingham. So super enjoyable, but yeah, more front end than back end. We had a great team of actually people delivering on the back end through the long Langer Rourke relationship.
From there, you had a small stint, if I'm not wrong, at CBRE. Why and how did that come about? And then talk to me about that decision.
Opportunity knock. So I was actually introducing Nick Jopling, who at the time was running the residential business within CBRE, which was a joint venture with Hamptons International. It was something that Nick was involved with setting up, and I was trying to introduce him to Roxy Light to see if he can get involved with some of these big residential mixed-use projects. At the end of the very long lunch, Nick said to me, well, why don't you come and work with me? And, when you spent by then 8 years working in entrepreneurial environments, and to your point earlier about looking at your colleagues, one thing they had, which I didn't have, was that institutional black book. I had some great contacts within the sharp end of commercial and residential development and real estate, but those institutional relationships, the Avivas, the LNGs, they just didn't come across my desk in my early stage of my career. And going into CBRE would have given me, and did give me, that access. So Nick got me involved. We created this CBRE Hamptons joint venture, did some great projects again. We got involved with Middlesex Hospital, which we sold to the Candies, which probably was the first major transaction that team helped on. And then more importantly, it gave me a great segue into actually looking at just opportunities which you probably won't find unless you were in that scale and size of machine. The best example is the whole regeneration of the Nine Elms corridor, which the team at CBRE, together with myself, spent some time looking at and staring at and thinking, why is it just such a secondary, tertiary industrial estate, given its proximity to the centre of London? And we worked with Roger Timms, who was working in Wandsworth, who was then the current planner, to try and evolve and create an alternative story. And it was during that story that I came across the next phase of my career, which was with Ballymore and the whole unlocking of the Nine Elms master plan.
So how long were you at CBRE working with Nick for?
3 years, and I would have done longer. It was nothing, or no reflection on CBRE at all. I did personally find giving advice, which I 100% didn't necessarily personally believe, quite hard. As an advisor, you have to basically get the balance between obviously what's right for your client and what's right for your, I suppose, their potential buyer or seller.
Yeah.
And that is a skill set which I think some people have brilliantly, and I didn't find it very easy. Probably,
because?
Well, I think when you come from a grassroots background, you sort of probably, which can be detrimental, get to a conclusion maybe quicker than you should do sometimes, but also have an opinion.
Because you have to.
You have that through lived experience.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a consultant, I think you have it through the technical skill set you have and probably the brilliant people around you. But you probably don't have the same lived experience as someone who's done this or had to do it, to your point.
Yeah, and there's no recourse for them giving the advice, right? It's not their money, it's not their asset. Whereas if it is yours, the buck stops with you.
Yeah, and you've got a client who probably is influencing that dialogue and discussion as well. So I wouldn't say I was the best pitcher or best, advocate of that consultancy role. But I say it did give you a great access to some brilliantly talented people, but also a market reach which doesn't exist in small companies.
And did it give you the opportunity to see a bigger picture within real estate, as in the types of institutions, platforms, deal sizes and scale that was actually on offer?
For sure. Yeah, incredible. Today those top 4 or 5 businesses, real estate advisory businesses, are global, both in terms of footprint and in terms of market share. They're massive businesses. And so that was super exciting, especially around people. You sit one day in a room with X and one day in Y, and these people are, leaders of their trade, leaders of their industry. And, you don't get that personal direct reach unless you are working in those types of organizations, or it's harder to come by.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed that part of it. And it was a great addition to my sort of calling card.
You moved to Ballymore. How and why did that come about, and what was your role there?
Yeah, through Nine Elms. So when Nine Elms transitioned into this mixed-use master plan, Sean Moran and John, the family business, they were clearly very active in East London, and we tried to bring them into Central London, which was the catalyst for their first investment out of the Docklands. And during that time of the market, there was a lot of Irish capital, a lot of Irish debt as well, supporting this. And so whether it was Battersea Power Station, whether it was with Ballymore, there was a competitive dynamic for sure, mainly Irish, across that whole mixed use corridor. So on the back of pitching that to Sean and Tim Farrow, who was working with Sean at the time, they asked me to come across. And so it was basically going back to what I felt most comfortable with, namely at the source rather than in the middle of the real estate journey. And I jumped at it.
Family kind of run business,
Yeah.
bigger scale, and an
Correct.
opportunity to kind of influence and get back to your core skill set, having had some time at CBRE.
And a great developer. I mean, you looked at what they were doing down the Docklands. Once again, if you like physical real estate and you get excited about master plan development, they were and they are still today the best in class, and learnt a lot from the business. Had a great time there, and actually the tough times were actually the best times. So seeing when the music stops and the Irish banks basically moved back to Ireland and left their main clients hanging in the UK. When you wake up one morning and you look at your boss and he looks at you and he's questioning whether the banks will be solvent, let alone the business, it's quite a meteoric change in how you look at your day-to-day routine.
What year was it that you joined Ballymore?
So that would have been 2008, 2009.
Okay, so you literally joined right at just before the GFC?
Yeah, probably had 2 years, 3 years, actually, looking back on it, 2 or 3 years. We did Ladbroke Grove, we bought some stuff in Brentford Docks, we looked at the acquisition of Nine Elms, and then 3 years into it, so it would have been 2006 probably, actually, I would have joined the team, and then we picked up the NAMA case study.
Irish Bad Bank. For someone who's listening to this who doesn't understand that, can you just give some additional context to that and actually what happened at the time? Because you touched on a second ago how actually when the music stops, that is a good thing of sorts to kind of learn, maybe not at the immediate time, but on reflection. Can you just give it a little bit more context for people listening to this who might not be privy to what exactly happened?
I mean, sure, it's super complicated, but high level, the banks lost control of their day-to-day routine. There was a independent government body which basically was put in place to control all expenditure, all projects, and basically lockbox the banks into doing anything. And if you were a recipient, i.e. a client of those banks, you yourself were handcuffed. We had to get permission literally to spend £10. Everything went through the books. Every week there was meetings with NAMA representatives. You had monthly meetings, quarterly evaluations. It was an extremely painful time. And if you're an entrepreneur and an incredible guy like Sean Moran and now John, his son, and you're basically watching your assets being literally taken away from you, you have two things. You either fight it, like some of them did, and actually some of them actually just jumped ship and went away and overseas, which was interesting learning itself, or you accept it, like John did and Sean did especially, and say, take it all, but back me. Because what we have is A, the knowledge, B, the experience, and C, most importantly, the land. And one thing it did teach me is that underlying land value in the right location is akin to gold, because you can't recreate land, as my grandfather once said. So through his ability to actually demonstrate A, what they'd done, and B, his humility, which was incredible to see, the results were fantastic. After 8 years, Ballymore went from being probably the hate figure of Irish real estate and arguably Irish finance.
Just because it borrowed so much, or the size and scale?
The size and scale of it, yeah. I mean, they were looking for a scapegoat, and someone like Sean who stuck with it rather than fled or basically fled the country or basically just walked away. Somebody actually stuck with it, had the conviction and the humility to stick with it, was very easy to be picked at. And seeing that business get through that initial period and then arguably evolve and within 5 years become a client of NAMA and a trusted advisor to NAMA and do joint ventures with NAMA was a great example of how, I was told once actually, make friends, but, you'll need them on the way down and the way up. And so when you basically have those friendships and you have that dynamic, it changes your perception. And I mean, Ballymore played a blinder, and I was a very small part of it. And I moved on after a year and a half of being in that NAMA handlock because it was very hard to basically see a way through it. But having experienced it both directly and also seeing the company grow afterwards, I mean, hats off to them.
So you moved to Blackstone.
Yeah, I moved to Blackstone.
And who the hell are Blackstone?
That was my own.
At that time, right?
That was my own. I'd never heard of Blackstone. I'd met Nick Lyle, who through a friend sort of said, just coming over from the West Coast into UK, if you've got any ideas or thoughts or want to show me around some stuff, please just shout, which obviously I did. And I've got
So Nick was coming over from the West Coast
Yeah.
to kind of help set up the,
that's
the
right.
UK and European platform.
Yeah, that was sort of Chad, Doug, Kirkland, those sort of guys in those days. It was a small business. There was sort of 10 people, 12 people in London on the sort of asset management and the transactional side. So it was still in its growth stage. And Nick had just been hired. Stuart Grant was there. So Stuart had been working for the business for a while. And having sort of spent some time with them, just sort of touring stuff and helping out where I could, really.
And was that was while you were at Ballymore?
Yeah.
And were you trying to pitch deals to them, or was it not necessarily that relationship? It was,
a little bit. I mean, as I learnt, pitching deals to Blackstone requires a certain technique, and I definitely didn't have it then.
Yeah, we'll come on to that in a minute.
I definitely didn't have it then. I remember actually, rather embarrassingly, Chad showed me one of my original pitches, which was, basically a flip chart with some dots and arrows and PSFs on it, so pounds per square foot. So it wasn't definitely the exemplar of a general Blackstone pitch deck. But no, I think it was a combination of just trying to pitch some deals and actually just stay close to the guys. And it was from more of a friendship level than it was a sort of mindset to go and work there. I mean, was a guy with basically no real qualification other than lived experience with no academic qualification, Oxford Poly, going to do working in a business like Blackstone. So I never had that mindset, but I got a call. So when people call, you obviously answer the phone.
So you got that call. Who was that call from, and what was the message?
It was from Nick actually saying that we're sort of at that stage, Blackstone, we're in some really complicated structures and some deals, Southern Cross, healthcare, etc. And Chad, he was a great visionary in terms of calling markets and reading cycles. Said, look, that sort of indirect investment window's probably closing. The opportunity set now post GFC is going to be direct real estate. Maybe they didn't have a bench internally who sort of had that direct real estate experience or relationships. I mean, clearly phenomenal investment banking relationships and almost investment bank mindset. But Chad, to his credit, said, right, get lock in and see what he's up to. So I went through the very strenuous and very stressful interview process, which you do at Blackstone. You meet everyone, you talk to everyone, it goes on and on and on. And actually, the day of my final interview with Chad was the day my wife gave birth prematurely to twins on Ladbroke Grove, literally in the morning. So it wasn't the best precursor for a meeting with Chad, who he's a bit of a stickler for detail and especially energy, which he has lots of. So I went in for a chat with Chad. He spoke at me for 45 minutes, luckily. I said a few things, and he said, well, do you want to work here? And I was very quick to decide. Ballymore was still in the NAMA handlock, and so the prospect for financial growth near term was limited. And obviously, you went from 3 billion of Irish government debt to 3 billion of raised equity, which what the business had then, which is still a lot of money, but I mean nothing in the context of how the business is today. It was an opportunity that I couldn't obviously refuse.
Did you have concerns around being a flight risk joining Blackstone, coming over to the UK, building up a platform, or were you just kind of overwhelmed by the equity they had, the vision and the plan and the opportunity set at that stage?
Good question.
Because you just had twins, right?
Yeah,
there's a risk element to that as well.
There was no flight risk that I perceived. There was definitely flight risk that I had about myself. I mean,
whether imposter syndrome? Am I going to be good enough?
I mean, imposter syndrome. I think some of these successful businesses feed off that insecurity. They're very good. I'm not saying Blackstone is like this, but they're very good at walking up the hill. But then when you get just near the top and you're basically reaching for oxygen, they give you a little nudge and you go a few pegs back again. So they keep that sort of energy going. And I personally had a challenge, I guess, definitely initially with sort of the perception of, am I good enough? Should I be here? How do I compete with sort of such an academic bench? Especially when you look at some of the qualifications and the incredible, academia of these people within these organizations. So imposter syndrome, I think you use, I guess for sure. Yeah, I mean, there was an element of imposter syndrome, but in that situation, what do? You basically do what you think you can do best, which is just stick to the real estate. And I was very clear throughout my time at Blackstone, and I think I had some interesting ups and downs with various CEOs and various leaders of the businesses, but hopefully one thing they would see is that I was constant to my core skills, which was fundamentally real estate, and focus on the things you're good at. And the other thing is, obviously, if you don't ask, you won't learn. So put your hand up, because in those environments, you can learn a huge amount, but also if you don't put your hand up, and it is a sort of, as Steve Schwartzman calls it, a zero defect environment, it doesn't help. So ask questions first to avoid making those mistakes.
Am I wrong in saying that Chad Pike, as a kind of a final sign-off, wrote James Locke, Oxford, Brookes College?
I think there may be some confusion.
To get you through? Or
definitely not to get me through. I think by that stage we were pretty much on
pretty
board.
much there.
But it's quite a rigorous onboarding process, and as part of your process, you had to obviously interface with New York, and New York requests a copy of your CV, which I sent on week 2, and I got an immediate response via fax from the lady who received it saying, "I think you're missing a few pages." Unfortunately, it was all on one page rather than 4 or 5, and it didn't have any Latin in terms of qualifications and exactly that. And then I think at the bottom there was a slight miscommunication around Oxford Brookes University being amended to Brookes College, Oxford. And I definitely wasn't going to change that. So I'm an Oxford guy, just the wrong side of the river, that's all.
Just fit in that way. So you joined Blackstone being very true to the fact that you're a real estate guy. You're not a real estate financier or a financier who's turned their hand to kind of real estate. How many people were in the London team at that stage? You had £3 billion worth of equity. And what was the kind of the mandate and your role in terms of trying to get the business off the ground and grow?
Yeah. So, I mean, Chad and John Gray were co-heads of real estate. Actually, Tony James, who's recently stood down, was COO. And obviously you had Steve Schwartzman, who was involved with everything. The business was going to grow in Europe. They were fundraising. They just closed their first fund, and obviously looking to deploy that capital. And those were the days where they did the brilliant deal with Broadgate, just done Chiswick Park. So that was my first transaction on the back of that, and looking to deploy capital into different areas. My original remit was to go in as asset manager and oversee UK asset management. And then, I guess by luck, or maybe through non-disclosure, Stuart left within 3 months to go and work in Asia. So there was a need to fill that void, which I best rested on my lap. And then I think within 6 months, Nick resigned to go and set up his own now very successful business, Crosstree Capital, with Sean, Crosstree Real Estate. So there was a huge void suddenly for me to either embrace or run from. And at that stage, Peter Stoll headed up asset management, who then went on to Carlisle. And together we built the asset management platform. But then within a year, I was a rare person within Blackstone, because normally you get stuck into your career path and you focus on that element of the business. But within a year, Chad asked me to come in, do a bit more of Nick's role in terms of origination and execution and acquisition. So I then transitioned into the acquisition team. At that stage, it was like, oh my God, I've really got to try and work out what we do now. And luckily, that was the day of the good old shed. And sheds were very unfashionable. They looked pretty cheap, even from my analytical standards, in terms of initial yields. There was no supply, and rents were bottoming out post GFC. And we got onto this basically huge journey of buying sheds and buying offices, 2 asset classes which historically I had some association with. So it was a great start to my investing career at BX.
And at Blackstone, was it a case of direct investing? Was it JVs with operating partners? And was it also building platforms as well? Were you doing all 3 types of deals, or did one kind of take precedent over the other at this stage?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think today is very different. In those days, they were probably more flexible about who they partnered with and on what, because there was less capital to deploy, and they were looking to basically make a broad range of investments across different areas. Because it's good risk diversification, but also it's a good way of growing your profile and growing the platform. So we had some joint ventures. We had a joint venture with Catalyst Capital. We had done some stuff with other UK property companies. Obviously the Broadgate, joint venture with British Land. But it very quickly pivoted to control and execution, direct execution, responsibility, and direct control. So it then became very case of let's just do this. Let's focus on what we're best at. Let's build teams around it, which they would say probably is part efficiency, probably part skill set. Just we've got good people. Let's get them to really focus on one area.
Yep.
And I guess within 2 years of my journey into Blackstone, I heard for the first time I heard the concept of thematic investing, which I didn't understand what it meant, to be honest. But
because at that stage it was kind of closed-ended, diversified, pooled funds, and you would look for where relative value was based on the return profile of that particular fund. So you might be buying a shopping centre or an out-of-town retail park, or an office or an industrial site, and you'd amalgamate it all together. So you had a blended risk that you'd look to return to an investor, right?
Yeah, correct.
Whereas now it was more about stock picking and more thematic and longer term kind of views and capital to
Yeah.
match that. Is that right?
Correct.
Or-
Yeah. I mean, you said it better than I could. Both in terms of the profile of what we were doing and what we were trying to do. But I mean, when you go from 3, and these numbers, by the way, I mean, I've had the good fortune of actually seeing £1 million in cash. Definitely not my own. And so I've always visualised the scale of that physical quantum of money. So I don't talk loosely around billions, but in the context of Blackstone, you have to learn pretty quickly that's what they're dealing in. So you go from 3 billion to 6 to 9 to 12 to 15 to 20. These are raised funds. And so deploying capital becomes a very important part of that investment process. So instead of doing 2 or 3 sub 50 million equity checks, you end up doing 400 investment into one sector or into one large scale investment. And that is efficient from their perspective, both in terms of deployment and in terms of overhead and control. And I think also the reason it changed was a change of personnel as well. I think Chad Pike, I would say, is a deep-rooted entrepreneur. He has an amazing ability to pick a deal, and he can look through a deal. And John Gray is exactly the same. But when John took control of the real estate business, he really sort of had this great saying, when people are jumping out of the pool, we want to be jumping in. So it was almost that sort of reverse psychology of around investing. And he still does it hugely successfully today across God knows how many strategies, and what a phenomenal individual. So that came with a change of mindset, which was, I think, supported by the market, but also driven by this mindset of, we're all in. Don't look at the path, look at the direction it travels was another favourite of his. So, try and be ahead of it. So picking an asset's great, but if you're picking an asset in a crowded pool, you're probably paying market price. If you can get ahead of that pool of capital and actually look at something in a different lens or with a different belief, he was brilliant at identifying that.
And with a bigger ticket as well. I
Correct.
guess it's the same process underwriting a 20 million quid deal as a 200 million pound deal, right? So it's just
very much their view.
more efficient in terms of focus. Quick one from me. If you haven't already subscribed or followed this show on the podcast or app where you listen or watch, please do. It takes 10 seconds and helps tremendously. I've got really big plans for the People, Property, Place podcast, and that one small action really, really helps grow the show and the presence and enables us to keep doing what we're doing. So if you haven't already, please follow or like on the platform you watch or listen to. Thanks so much. So can you just talk to me about some of those platforms that you were involved in and what some of those themes were? Because Logical, Mileway, Biomed, Hudson, there's a whole range of these platforms. Are they the business lines that you...
Correct. I mean, it comes with two people. It comes with two ingredients. One is market-led. One is brilliant people. And, there were some brilliant managers within the business. I mean, Ken Kaplan, Anthony Mars, they all came through and managed the London office. And now, obviously, James runs the London office, which covers Europe as well. And it did then. So leadership is great. The other thing I learned is that the wind blows from west to east. So back a theme that the Americans are backing, and generally you won't get fired. So when I was looking initially, the first foray into that sort of themed investment was around logistics. And even I couldn't screw that up. So we bought some great sheds, or we went 3 times to IC at sort of 9-10 caps. We basically saw the ability to grow rents. We saw this whole bit of luck, bit of judgment, like everything in life, this whole just weight of industry into online, whether it's basically the actual process of delivering or was the technology behind online. And that obviously helped the story of logistics hugely. So e-commerce became a very favourable tailwind. And we had great success. And that was probably the first major platform that Blackstone had built in the UK.
What time was that? 2012, 13,
I think our first investment was 12, Project Triangle, brought from London Stanford, now London Metric, and then we did one from Prologis, and we did 2, and then we started buying, and the train hasn't stopped since. Incredible, really. That was an amazing experience, having that conviction, having the ability to go out and do deals, not even think about basically whether they're the right ones, but just aggregate. This is going to prove out to be a great theme.
So just buy through that.
Obviously there were some schemes, clearly markets and some markets which you avoided, but it was like a go-get mentality, which I've never experienced. I was a single asset guy, spend months analysing an individual building. It was like, right, James, what's next? What's the next month's ticket? What's on the following month's ticket? Investment committee ticket. So we did that.
Because the challenge is just getting the capital out the door. And so it's just finding the deals. And was
having
that
having the belief as well.
I guess massively so, that you're doing the right thing, especially a few years ago. You know, the whole world had taken a massive hit. Was that where Logicore started coming to the frame, or did all this kind of shed buying, did that precede Logicore?
Preceded, yeah. Logicore is the output. That's the end game. So we spent 5 years aggregating this business across different geographies, across different, asset types. You know, it was mainly big box, but obviously there's ranges within that, 250,000, 500,000, bit of development as well. And having basically looked at managing it internally on a few occasions, it was a case of like, we've got this asset base, it's going to keep growing. How do we, A, monetize it? Well, through a recap, and B, how do we give it the sort of independence to then go and grow again, so we can move on to something else? And that something else was now the incarnation of Marway. So we went from big box to small industrial. I remember very clearly we were in a strategy review, which once again was squeaky bum time. So they all come over, they sit there. It's being held in Chiswick Park.
As in the US?
The US colleagues, direct SMDs, and John himself, and a fantastic man called John Schreiber, who was chairman of Blackstone Real Estate, and just a genius. Looked through the lens of both finance and also just practical application around real estate. Just a great guy. And I had to do my pitch, and my pitch was multi-let industrial, and verbatim the feedback directly was, we don't buy shitty real estate. Anyway, we then got onto a conversation around maybe why it could be interesting, and this two-tier solution to logistics supply chain, outfield, infield, blah blah blah, and then accepting that some of the pictures probably weren't the best I'd put in this deck either. So we then got onto this theme of multi-let last mile, which became last mile, but fundamentally it was multi-let industrial. Same logic. Tenants being really, unsensitive to rent. It was like £3 or £4 square foot rents.
Yeah.
Lack of supply, again, because we've been through GFC, no product coming through, increase in demand. It was just simple real estate, supply-demand dynamics, which, people sometimes forget. I mean, the fundamentals of real estate are very simple. That's why I took a career in it, because I probably wouldn't succeed elsewhere. You've got to basically overlay that today with a bit of, financial engineering as well, but rely on the fundamentals and it should serve you okay. So both those played out very well, and Marway again was a huge success.
So was that a case of everyone kind of looking at offices or retail or some slightly sexier or shinier kind of objects, and you just taking a step back and looking at it and going, multi-let is, there's massive tailwinds behind it. There's an opportunity set here. It's pretty unloved. It's not that institutional. We reckon we can buy some of these sites at scale. And then really easily not easily, but it's going to be very granular, but then start turning the screw. And once you've done that on one little estate, it's the multiplier effect in terms of the values is going to increase rapidly. I
don't think that is the case. I think you basically buy two things. You buy underlying assets, which look a very attractive discount to replacement cost, and you buy cash flow. And those were both present in both logistics and in terms of multi-let industrial. I think on a balanced portfolio, you look at how Blackstone deploy capital, you also look at how you can basically get that alpha, and that sometimes comes through development. And in the same time we were deploying money in logistics and multi-let industrial, we were doing 12 office transactions individually within central London, which once again was a hard sell because these were complicated, they were back to frame, they were part of the whole Blackstone / John Gray mantra of buy, fix, sell. So, between 12 and 15 we acquired these assets. Adelphi, through to St Catherine's Docks, through to Lake on House, through to Devonshire Square. Some were brought from distressed sellers, some were brought on the back of a deemed appropriate business plan, so heavy lift. And it was basically a weighted exposure. There were definitely sectors, like any investor, which at the time there was nervousness about, shopping centres being one. And once again, a great lesson from John Schreiber, who actually flew into Luton Airport on a non-commercial flight. And I was told to go and meet him. This was a Thursday morning, and he was going to fly to St Enoch's shopping centre in Glasgow, which was being sold at the time, I believe, by Ivanhoe Cambridge. And we had looked at this and we'd analysed it, and through the seller dynamic and through the probably opportunity specific to this asset, bearing in mind it was town centre location scale, we got excited about it, because generally shopping centres even then were something we were very adverse to doing. Anyway, the investment itself I'll come back to, but the most embarrassing thing was I'd never been on a private jet before. And I didn't know this, but you have like chairs, and then sofas. And sofas, you I thought you just sit on the sofa. I mean, why would you basically bother putting your seatbelt on when you're like just chilling at the back? And anyway, we took off, and and John Schreiber used to drink litres of Starbucks, which I'd basically brought for him in advance. You had to know every data set, every bit of stuff, and buy him a coffee. So we had the coffee. He was sitting in seat, not 1A, but the boss seat. I was in the back, and as we took off, I literally just slid down the sofa, and this coffee went everywhere. And he turned around, and literally I was on my back. So that was not a great start to our asset tour in St. Enoch's. But taught me a great lesson. He said, and it's very relevant today. Investing in certain real estate applies to offices today. I think they're like shipping tankers. You've got to keep putting money in to move very, very small angles of difference. And he looked at this centre and he said, fundamentals look great. You can drive rent, you've got active demand, your town centre location, you're seeing benefits from basically Sauchiehall Street coming into the centre, but you've got to put a lot of money in. And then obviously BHS had gone bust, and we thought it was an opportunity, but more money to go in there. And it really taught me a real insight to that shopping centre, or that high asset management, high operational real estate. To make things change, and it's relevant for offices today, you've got to put capital in, and you've got to back the assets, which can basically have that incremental outsized change or turn or pivot from putting that $1 in. And St. Enoch's wasn't the one, and it didn't work out well for us.
Yeah, you can't just buy the assets, sit on it, and make your returns that way. And I think a lot of people are finding that out now at the start of a new cycle, as you touched on, in terms of that operational piece. You touched on, and I want to move the conversation to rotation. But Marway has been a roaring success and has gone through lots of different changes. Obviously seeded with M7 and Oryx before it kind of pivoted out, and Span and Logical has gone on to do some great things. What are some of your lessons? Because you're involved with as you said, the offices and TOG, and then kind of film studios with Hudson Pacific. What are some of your kind of learnings from building those platforms over and above what you've already said?
Don't fall in love with your real estate. So look at it as literally nothing other than just a commodity. We'll come back to that maybe, because I think real estate in the last 5 years on cheap debt has become over commoditized. But don't fall in love with it either. So get the right balance between basically believing in it and investing your time and energy into it. But time can be to your detriment as well if you keep believing that this is best in class, this is the best asset within the subsector. So stick to your framework, stick to your business plan. So I think that's a good lesson. People, without a doubt, probably the most important part of an execution plan. You can have, the best investment guy or girl, run the numbers, put together a great structure, get a great financing, put in place a great maybe joint venture. But, as I said to my colleagues when I was at Blackstone, you can buy a site, you just got to pay a quid more than the next person. It's actually how you take that pound and make it two, ideally. So the execution with the right people and the right partners is fundamental. Obviously, Blackstone have done that with Hudson in the US on film studios. And I think the best example is probably the Biomed team, who are just brilliant people who know their market, they know everything about that market, and they wake up every day and think about that market. So I'd probably go against the idea of being sector specialists, because I think in today's world, you need to have a slightly broader spectrum of outlooks. I know for the last 10 years, it's become very fashionable to just deal with specialists. I think it can work two ways. I think you become almost biopic in terms of one thing and actually forget maybe the bigger picture. But at the same time, you want people who really understand that sector and have that they've been through the journey. So I think they're two learnings. People, for sure. Having the right structure, for sure. Having the right incentivization is key as well. Incentive is the best form of any I think, energy. If people aren't incentivized, then this is not a what we're doing today is it's the one chance we have to do it, so make the most of it, and incentive is part of that journey. People and product and structure, I think, are three lessons. And having the conviction. I mean, I've never been more amazed than sort of the Blackstone learning of conviction, and something I'm still learning. When you really believe in something, you've got to go all out to prove it, to run with it, to promote it. I mean, when you're investing in scale, it's easier because some people actually, you create your own market. Blackstone does. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying it's a negative way, but it can rely upon an element of that to basically drive value. I mean, they're investing, so everyone else is all in, as they would say.
It's a herd mentality, yeah.
Bit of herd mentality, which once again, I don't think is going to be around for not in the scale it was, maybe around certain specific assets, but I think that sort of cheap financing was driven by herd mentality. Keep basically buying the yield curve. But in today's world, I think you touched on it. I mean, operational real estate. When I grew up, first labouring around London, everything was about creating value. I mean, it was called value add. You bought something which may be actually at a yield below your debt, and people look at you today like, what? I mean, I asked a question once at Blackstone, what is cash on cash? I mean, it seems strange in the concept of physical real estate to rely upon that. You've got to create total return, which is asset management and income. And I think that's where we are today. Probably pivots onto why, I stood backwards from a great career at Blackstone after 13 years and rolled the dice on my own business, because I saw a seismic change, I think, in basically how people are looking at real estate today versus maybe how they would have looked at it 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect segue, because you've obviously been there from 13 years. You're probably kind of number 13 into the UK business. 3 billion at that stage. It's got over 300, if I'm not mistaken, or
probably more.
However many noughts at the end of it. And the team is vast, and they're kind of conquering. They're financial engineers and they're real estate people as well, and data is a big part of their success too, and they can see kind of global trends. Why did you decide fundamentally to take a step back from Blackstone and at 48 years old set up your own business?
Very good question. It must be mad. I think when you have I'll be very candid, there's sort of two elements. One is pride. Within that business like Blackstone, there's an element of meritocracy. And there's people who get rewarded for doing very good work, and sometimes those people have maybe a slightly different background to you, and so there's a clearer pathway for them to basically keep going up the ladder at Blackstone. And when you get to a managing director, the step between MD and senior managing director is seismic, and there's only a number of people who take that. And I think two things: maybe I wasn't ever committed to doing that, because with that comes also certain sacrifices. Which
from a personal
standpoint, yeah. I think from a personal standpoint, the work ethic within the business, and hence why it's so successful, and people like James Zapata and Samir Amici are what they are today in terms of where they stand in the industry, is because they commit a huge amount of work and commitment to the business. There was an element of pride. People were getting promoted around you, and you weren't probably running at the same level. So by default, we're all human. So you look back and say, actually, well, I'm going to go and prove them, not wrong is the wrong word, but do something different. There was an element of nervousness around taking that sacrifice, and that comes with a lot of years of prep as well. You don't just go like year 10 to year 11 SMD. You have to work at it continuously. And I had a very different work ethic. Don't get me wrong, I worked as hard as anybody, but weekends were probably more focused on alternatives like family rather than getting prepared for the next Monday morning meeting. So it's a combination of lifestyle, combination of pride, and then most importantly, it was just when you've got a scratch, saying you've got to itch it. I've always had that, need to itch that scratch. That's the right way around. And so you stand back and you say, when should you do this? And I was going to do it actually before probably COVID, or at least consider it. And I had a very good relationship with James and with Ken. I always said, when I get to the stage where I've sort of run out of steam and I don't feel like I'm giving 110%, I'll just say so and have a conversation on maybe how I can pivot to an alternative role, or pivot with you maybe. Even better, and to go and look at doing something else. And then COVID came. I got involved with some great businesses like Ballymore and HBP, and I had a great 2 years. And then year 13 came, and a combination of the things I mentioned plus the market really excited me. So I decided to step back and resigned 12 months ago and started, longer than 12 months ago, started Rotation Real Estate on the 1st of Jan.
You resigned 6 months, or did you have kind of a year notice? How did that work?
No, none of that. I mean, Blackstone are brilliant at that. I mean, consensual all the way through. I mean, they see the value in me, hopefully. We have an ongoing relationship on a few strategies and a few assets. And with that comes a belief that I can still work with them. And the combination of me being on this side of the fence and them being on their side doesn't mean we shouldn't basically be crossing paths on a continuous basis, especially from my point of view and from theirs. I guess I'm a sort of, if I'm being candid, a pretty cheap option. And to me, they're a potential great source of capital and a great source of friendships and loyalty. So there's nothing like that at all. We just got to the stage where, end of the year, shake hands. I thank them for all I got out of the business. I mean, I remember standing up now, almost, I can feel it in my body, the nervousness of basically going to, the LP conference and presenting for 4 years. I mean, I got a BCD from Oxford Poly. I'm in a room with 900 people, some of the brightest people in the world, supposedly running billions of dollars. And I'm explaining to them why they should invest in London real estate. And I always pinch myself being a farmer's son that actually could have ever occurred. I mean, so I got a huge amount out of it, both professionally and personally. So no, I'm not at all. And I'm still very close to some of the team members within the business. So you shake hands, you move on, and you keep going. And that's where we currently are, 6 months, 7 months into it. And it's just been nothing short of exhausting, exhilarating, exciting, and all the things you've done yourself in terms of being an entrepreneur. And yeah, you never really know what it's like until you're in it. I was close to it, London town, 3 of us, Roxy Light, 4 of us. I come from an entrepreneurial background. And the word entrepreneurial is overused, but I mean, being a self-starter, it's very different when it's you rather than basically on a team.
So you went from labourer, manager, innovator, developer, investor to owner. Did you have a business plan? Did you have capital? You touched on you kind of had an arrangement with Blackstone and maybe some contingency fees or what have you on a couple of strategies and a bit of advice. What was the kind of the plan, the strategy, the view, the vision for rotation?
None. No, none at all. I didn't have a business plan. Didn't have a cash flow. You've got to have confidence in your ability to stay relevant, find interesting opportunities, and rely upon some great deep-rooted relationships to put good ideas with capital. That is the business plan. I think a lot of people out there come from either a maybe financial background and create their own investment manager or asset manager, and maybe lack some of the lived experience you get from actually being at the grassroots end of development or in real estate. At the same time, there are people who come from maybe a delivery element who then try and create an investment manager and probably don't have the forward-looking lens of what the investor and or the capital partner requires. If I had a business plan, it was the idea of bringing both those two together. I've spent 13 years in probably the best institution in the world, and I've hired people who have come from similar institutions, but also I've got this deep-rooted understanding experience of just real estate, which I'm passionate about and love. And I'll be looking to basically probably bring more people in from that end of the spectrum to basically create that balance. But that's really the vision: institutional understanding, financial rigor with grassroots real estate, and bring it together. And of course, there are people out there, successful people out there who have done this, but I still think there's a room for a slightly different approach, and I still think there's definitely a room for the market cycle we're moving into. So that was the business plan. Cash flow and modelling all that up, who knows? I mean, as you know yourself, whatever you forecast is going to be wrong. So you give yourself a window of time to put the predator mindset on, to go and try and be successful and do it. And you hope that within that period of time, you've got the either relationships like Blackstone, who, as you've touched on, have an ongoing relationship with them, or you basically engender a relationship with other parties and other fees to basically support that process. And that's the risk you take. And if you don't, something else will come of it. But I'm a big believer that, having the ability to almost let go is very hard. Control your inputs, but don't try and control the outputs. And I have a career coach who's been super helpful in terms of having a partner to bounce stuff off, other than my poor wife, who obviously gets the wrong end of that sort of journey of discovery, the bad things rather than the good things. And, as she said, you've got to have this mindset of, remind what self-worth. You've done a lot, so believe in that, which people don't, and it's hard to do. I think British people generally are quite standoffish from that, but remember what you've done, so have that. Be present in the moment wherever you can. Don't get too bogged down in exactly what you're trying to do. And the best thing that she said was no expectations. And she works with sports professionals, and this whole expectation. Imagine being an Olympiad. You spend 4 years of your life grinding away every day for 9 seconds or 30 seconds or 2 hours, depending on what sport you're doing, but 4 years. So imagine having this burden of expectation every day. If you have that, you'll just get worn down. Control your inputs for sure. And that's what we try and do at Rotation. We work hard. We're hopefully quite innovative in our thinking. We're super enthusiastic. You have to be. Probably we could do more of that. I could do more of that in terms of the energy, but the energy's dialed up. You have to have it on full 100%, don't you, as you know? But at the same time, control the inputs, but let the outputs just,
What are some of the kind of the themes and the strategies that you're thinking about at the moment and you're having conversations with capital about?
Yeah, so we're working on a couple of great projects, portfolio transactions, part of the whole sort of reorganisation or restructuring of non-listed REITs and or funds, annuity funds, end-of-life funds. So we're trying to basically get onto the end of those types of transactions, and we're working on one currently, which is super exciting, and we've been on that since basically inception of the business. And we like that because, as I mentioned, we've got a touch point across the whole range of different real estate. These are generally sort of balanced funds. They've got retail, they've got industrial, they've got office, so we can add value there. We can also look at spot pricing and run all the basic analysis around that and build out the business plans very clearly and very succinctly. So it's a good way of us getting our skill set into the capital. So that's been quite successful. We've probably lost one. We'll probably hopefully get one. I don't know. Who knows? So portfolio mop-ups or portfolio tidy-up plays where there's a reason for selling. I mean, we like the idea of working on a project where we know there needs to be an outcome. You appreciate when you're doing a business, time is not on your side. So, working on things that you think will happen, probably better than trying to manufacture things which won't happen. Portfolios, we're spending some time on big box logistics, going back to the good old roots, keeping it simple. Supply demand imbalance on that big box is always harder to read. But we think, once again, there's an interesting inflection point between forecasted supply and the reality of supply, especially in light of what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years with construction costs. And we still think that supply chain pattern of whether it's reshoring or onboarding, or I don't know what all these acronyms are, but there's still going to be a pretty good depth of demand for that. So we like big box logistics. And the office, we're sitting in a TOG building today, which I touched on when I was at Blackstone, and Charlie's actually downstairs. I mean, phenomenal vision to get to create this type of product in Henrywood House. The evolution of the office is for sure happening. As I mentioned at the outset, why now? There's technological change, there's societal change, there's regulatory change, and it's touching so many different elements of the real estate spectrum and uses, and arguably offices right in the middle of this storm. ESG, relevancy, occupier needs, feels, demands, financing. So, when it's difficult, arguably we should be looking at that and trying to come up with solutions. So, we're definitely not stepping back from office. And they're the sort of current themes. But, once again, you'll appreciate this. When an opportunity comes, it could be anywhere.
How have you gone about building your team? And what's the vision and the view in terms of the size and scale and team members coming into the business as well?
Still working on the vision. Yeah. Should be getting clarity on that probably more so than I am, but just the pace of running at it's hard to see maybe how that plays out. But that, once again, back to my phenomenal career coach, she's been on to me about that. So the team would hopefully say that the vision is built around the principles you discussed in your introduction: integrity, energy, ethics, lived experience, and bringing it under one roof. And the people I've got who have joined me so far, Alessandro Matthew came from Blackstone. He was there. He left before I left, actually, but has come on board. It's amazing when you look at someone like Alessandro. He's 31. He's been at Blackstone for his whole professional career. And he talks about, in front of investors or in front of advisors or colleagues, a number of deals he's done. I mean, that's one thing people don't understand. When you work in these organizations like Blackstone, you do 40 deals a year. I mean, a year, maybe more. So he's got a huge depth of experience in transactions. Nick Otterettin, who came from Morgan Stanley. Nick worked with Nick White on the banking side, so a skill set probably I don't have an 8 out of 10. Structuring, financing. Nick's actually from a real estate background, but went into investment. Went into banking. So he's got both tools in his locker, but definitely a skill set which helps me when we start to do transactions, start to put in place financing, structuring, and execution. We've taken on Sam Parker, who came from a real estate background as junior associate, and my long-suffering assistant Danny was mad enough and kind enough to come on board as well, and that's the current team. And obviously, as we grow assets, we'll basically look to bring in asset management skills and grow that team. But do we see ourselves as a one-stop shop for everything? No. I mean, I do believe that we can rely upon some brilliant people outside of the camp to execute for us, contracting-wise, QS-wise, etc. But the core nucleus of real estate needs to sit within the building. So for sure, as we grow, hopefully the headcount will grow at a sensible rate and with the right skill sets and the right mix of people as well, most importantly. I'm a big believer in people power and getting that right energy. And real estate historically has not been so good at that, I'd say. And bringing people in from different backgrounds, different talents, different, everything is I think, a good thing.
We've spoken a little bit about the business and the deals and the team. Can we just touch on the type of capital that you'd look to partner with? Who is that or what type of institutional group or capital source would you look to like to work with?
Any. No, I mean, we've got a view on this. I mean, we try and line ourselves with the more of the institutional capital, principally from private equity background, just because we understand, back to my earlier point around looking at it through their lens and our own, through basically having the experience of working in those organisations. I think the capital is key to have common alignment. So to answer your question, we like to work with capital where we have a commonality of view. They really do appreciate the value we can bring, and hopefully we can get rewarded for that. At the same time, we need to be mindful of their long-term commitment to either us or to the sector or to the asset type. I think, huge personal energy can go into developing relationships, and, sometimes those are probably shorter than people expect. And at that stage, things generally don't work out. But having common alignment either in duration or in terms of remuneration, I think is really important. But institutional capital, private capital, I think you'll see a huge growth in private wealth over the next few years. You're seeing that from the alternative investment that is going into private wealth solutions from a number of different institutions. So hopefully we'll be able to basically work with, as I say, other capital sources outside of that institutional bracket, but the common thread should be commonality of view, bilateral relationships.
As we draw to a close, James, the question I ask everyone on the podcast is, if I gave you £500 million worth of capital, who are the people, what property, and which place would you look to deploy that capital?
Who are the people? Well, hopefully you're looking at it. So I'd be remiss of myself not to say that. So we'd love to basically have that type of capital. In terms of the assets, as I say, we've got our views on different strategies at the moment. I think whatever we did, it would be on a diversified basis. If it was a 500 million lockbox, I think there's some great contrarian views. Actually, Nick mentioned, my colleague, when I was talking about this, he said you shouldn't be contrarian for just the sake of being contrarian. Very true. Contrarian is an overused word, but I think there's some really interesting cyclical pays, like leisure. I think the role of the cinema, for sure, today is not a good week to be talking about it with Cineworld and the restructuring, but people have basically dismissed a number of things through Netflix, through technology, which actually haven't played out. And I think the leisure, actually, human interaction, open space, car parking, if you want to get technical, free car parking, but I think leisure is an interesting area. But it'll be a diversified pool of investments in themes that we 100% have the conviction, as I mentioned earlier, to believe in. And in terms of where, I'm just a UK guy, so it would have been principally 80% probably London, 20% in the regions. I think the regions have got some phenomenal cities being evolved through education, through growth, through tech. Bristol, Manchester obviously has been established, Bristol, Leeds. It would be probably a focus around those cities, as well as the great capital city that we're doing this from.
If you cast your eye back to when you were 16, labouring on just off the Edgware Road, did you have the expectation before the age of 50 you would have had the career that you have had and you'd be the founder of your own business?
Jesus, I get emotional. No, definitely not. There's so many things which occur in life which are driven by a combination of right time, right place, and luck. The reason I met the guy I basically laboured for was because I was 16, stone at 16, I kept breaking snowboards, and one actually hit his daughter, and I was confronted by this guy, and I thought he was going to take my block off. So I had a conversation. I said, I'm really sorry, I'll pay you back anyway. He said, well, it can't work for me. I'm looking for a labourer. I said, fine. Never would have happened otherwise. Roxy Light, met through just very strange connections. Sean, Ballymore, through the work we did with CBRE. Just every avenue. That's why I'm a big believer. Whatever you do in life, never underestimate what that meeting or call or interaction could be. In a world we live in today where everything's done, a lot of it's done too much without face-to-face engagement. If someone says to you, do you fancy a meeting? Do you fancy a coffee? Do you fancy going somewhere? Say yes. Behind a screen, only certain things can happen. In the real world, you've got to get out there and meet people. And that's been my major benefit, I think, for my career. But to answer your question, not a chance. But I'm pleased how it has worked out, and I think the next 10 years will be hopefully just exciting and definitely as rewarding.
Well, James, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Excited to see what you and the team go on to do.
Good to be here. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the People, Property, Place podcast. If you found it insightful, feel free to share it with a friend or colleague. Give us a rating, like, or comment. It helps tremendously. It'd be great to hear from you on LinkedIn. I'm super open-minded to recommendations of guests that we should have on the show. or areas of the market we should explore further. So do drop me a message. The People, Property, Place podcast is powered by Rockborn. The team recruit leadership and future leadership hires for real estate owners, funds, investors, and developers. So if you're looking to hire top talent for your business, head over to the website www.rockborn.com, where you'll be able to find a wealth of information, or feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. Have a great day wherever you are, and I look forward to catching you next time.